Welcome, Climate Viewers. This is Jim Lee from ClimateViewer News with facts minus fear porn. You can check me out at ClimateViewer.com, WeatherModificationHistory.com, and ClimateViewer.org. So we got some breaking news on this whole Chaff issue. For those who don't know what Chaff is, it's electronic countermeasures, or the military spraying chemicals to defeat radar. And we got some breaking news just happened. First article up is dated January 15th, and I've got a couple backstories on that. And then we're going to get into the real details behind what is Chaff, how it works, and why the military doesn't tell us when they're doing it, and why they do it over America. So buckle up, this is going to be a crazy one. All right, so just want to say up front, everything I do is open source, free of charge, advertisement free. You're free to remix this material on your website, or re-upload it. Just give a link back to the original. All I ask is that you support me with a monthly donation on Patreon or a one-time donation on PayPal or GoFundMe. I would greatly appreciate that. So we're over here. This is ClimateViewer News, ClimateViewer.com. I updated the front page. I just did a couple videos that haven't been uploaded yet. But if you haven't seen my most recent two videos, I had some serious issues with my hard drive. My climate viewers came to the rescue. I've already ordered the parts. They should be here on Monday, and hopefully I'll be back in business with a new PC shortly thereafter. My video card's going to take another week and a half to get back from the company because it blew up. But regardless, things seem to be going really well, and I appreciate everybody who donated. I'll be sending you an email personally tomorrow. Been crazy with the kids today. So first up, here's the Courier Press. What did I click? Oh my gosh, I just clicked something. Anyway, so more Chaff. Evansville area radar blips had an answer, these don't. I'm gonna drop links in chat as we go if I don't hit my macro button. So let me try that again. I hit my macro instead of my control. So everybody can play along at home. Here you go. So here's the article. Damn, this website has a sidebar little thing on it that is just ridiculous. I'm trying to blow it up here. Okay, so for starters, they got a UFO video up here. New information on military UFO sightings have been realized. Has nothing to do with this. But anyway. The mystery was solved, then it wasn't, then it was. Now, well, who knows? Back on December 10th, the Evansville area was embroiled in intrigue when mysterious radar blips appeared over southern Illinois and western Kentucky. The long lines baffled National Weather Service because they looked like storms, but it wasn't raining. The war zone eventually confirmed the anomalies arose when a C-130 traveling to West Virginia from a military exercise out west released over our area huge plumes of military chaff. So bring that link up real quick, and you can see here radar mystery may have been solved again. Sounds reasonable. Huge plumes of military chaff, radar jamming material mostly composed of aluminum. It's also composed of plastic fibers and a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're in explosive charges, so that's where a lot of the aluminum comes from. And that's what's basically in the picture here. This is what a chaff dispersal looks like. I believe that's a C5A Galaxy, but regardless, they're very similar from a C-130. This is something called Big Photo. We're going to go into the terminology behind military chaff before the end of the video. But regardless, this is what they're talking about. So, sounds reasonable, but it does not explain what happened in Maine and Florida around the same time. Similar blips materialized on radar over Portland, Maine, on December 12th. The National Weather Service also guessed chaff was to blame. But unlike here, no concrete explanation sprang forth. According to the war zone, the 1 Maine Air National Guard flying unit doesn't have any planes equipped to release chaff, and it's not like a plane from a different base would jet all the way to Maine just to spew chaff. The same day, strange radar shapes appeared over the Florida Keys too. Again, the National Weather Service guessed it was chaff. Florida is apparently rife with military exercises, but that hypothesis was never confirmed. And they've got a little photo here. It's very small, but they show the blip. This is what chaff will typically look like. Big linear rain cloud on NEXRAD. And then they got a tweet here. Appears to be chaff also showing up on the radar on southern Florida. Pic.twitter.co. Let's see if that actually comes up. And here we go. There you go. There's their thing. I'm going to retweet that. Bam. Boom. Thank you. You've been in our video. So, all of it could really twist your brain into a labyrinth, especially if you indulge in conspiracy theories. And I heard a lot of those folks when a story I wrote about the phenomena landed on the Drudge Report. We believe there is more to the story than the FAA and military and publications such as the War Zone are telling us, said investigator from Mutual UFO Network told me in an email after the blips appeared over Illinois and Kentucky. There are a high number of factoids that don't add up. All I'm saying is, as an opening act for a giant extraterrestrial invasion, no, we're not that lucky, but whatever it is, it's exceedingly strange. Chaff. If all these instances were caused by chaff, what kind of mass nationwide exercise was the military conducting? And why was radar jamming material so prominent? It conjures another question, too. It's dangerous to have large amounts of this junk. Is it dangerous to have large amounts of this junk hovering in the atmosphere? According to studies by the Air Force and government agencies have commissioned since the 1990s, military chaff poses little, if any, threat. I would disagree with that. Based on reviews of numerous toxicological studies, the key components of chaff, alumina, silica, glass fibers, and stearic acid, will not pose an adverse impact on human and environmental health. It does, however, hover in the atmosphere for an inordinate amount of time, as much as 10 hours at a time. So if these reported military exercises continue, you can expect more radar anomalies to crop up all over the country. So a couple things spring out to me here. I've also read military studies on the inhalation of aluminum. And one was like in vitro toxicity of inhaled nanoparticle aluminum. And they basically took a bunch of rats and they pumped them full of, aluminum nanoparticles. And they basically developed tumors all over their alveoli or inside their lungs. So you can't have it both ways. And, also with them having silica glass fibers, and also, some of these are like plastic fibers. This may explain some of these, spider-like, web coating things that people have found on their farms and, commonly attributed to chemtrails. But these are military exercises. They're secret, and nobody's really going to tell you the full truth about this. So back to the story. Over here on the war zone, now massive plumes of chaff are lighting up radar over Maine and Florida too. This is December 12th, 2018, and you can see them here. So this is what they look like. Big, long streamers. Okay? Bamboo Soldier, I always appreciate you, brother, man. And I'm not going to read this whole article to you. I'll drop the links in chat. They will be in an article later on ClimateViewer.com. I've still got to catch up on the last 2 videos I did and get the links up for those 2. But here we go. A West Virginia Air Guard C-130H was responsible for massive chaff cloud over Midwest. The crew released all of the chaff cartridges on board as they returned to base from a training exercise on the West Coast as a safety precaution. So there's that. So just like I showed you in the photo to begin with, this is what it looks like when they release the chaff. And anybody who's ever played a flying video game or something has had a missile on their tail, and it's like, release chaff. Well, the purpose of chaff in these cases also is to throw off the heat-seeking portion of a missile. So while all of that heat is shooting away from the plane in hopes that the heat-seeking missile will chase the chaff instead of the plane. So it's not just for defeating radar, as they say, but it could also be, some of these fancier bombs, missiles have, radars built into them, and some of them, like the AMRAAM, are literally designed to chase down radars. So maybe that's a possibility. But regardless, I think I put that in chat? Here we go. You guys can get that link as well, since you're live with me now. But let's take a look. So real quick, I'm over here on climateviewer.org/3D, and this is ClimateViewer 3D. And what I've done is I've brought up all the NEXRAD radar stations in America. And as you can see, there are many of them. And what I've done is you can actually go and say, like, down here in Florida, click on this one and then click radar animation. And it'll pop you to the College of DuPage radar animation page. And you can actually see there's that. And we can animate that bad boy. Give me 1 second. The flash player is enabled. It always is enabled. Give me animations. So let's see if we can see this chaff looking clouds off the coast there pop up towards the end. Something's starting to form here. And then bam. No, that doesn't look like chaff to me. That looks, it's linear. But anyway. So this is how they're finding these sorts of things. Many of the people in chat are familiar with Mike Morales. He does an excellent... I'm not sharing screen again. Many of the people in Chaff are familiar with Mike Morales, and he does an excellent job of, covering all of these, NEXRAD radar anomalies that occur on a regular basis. And, all I did was I clicked on the radar station down here, and I clicked on radar animation. Now, underneath that is NEXRAD station data. Now, if you really want to dig... Government shutdown. Gotta love it. So apparently you can't get NEXRAD level 3 data right now because the website you're trying to access is not available at this time due to a lapse in appropriation. The government shutdown has shut down my NEXRAD level 3 data. Boo. Anyway, so when the government reopens, you'll be able to go back to the NOAA website and do that. So this is my NEXRAD map that apparently I forgot to switch back to the screen. And you can see all of the NEXRAD radar stations. If you want to actually see them, you come over here to base maps, go to satellite view, and you can zoom down to the ground to any one of these by clicking the little icon here. And you'll see that, I pretty much nailed them. There it is right there. So there's your NEXRAD radar station. I've put every, it was pretty hard to track all these down. But regardless, trust me, they're accurate. That's my point in showing you that. So, in addition, I have the Canadian SIGMET Doppler radar stations, which you can see up here at the top. There, let me turn off the NEXRAD. So these are the Canadian ones in addition to the US ones. But regardless, I'm going to put it back on the black screen to make a point. So this is what you normally see on the Weather Channel. And this is the filtered version of NEXRAD radar data. But there are other forms of this NEXRAD radar info that you normally don't get to see. And I'll give you an example. So let me turn on the base. This is the base reflectivity. So let me turn this one on real quick instead. So we're going to go between the two. All right. Base reflectivity. There's our pencil beams, our real radar anomalies, all the weird atmospheric bloom stuff that you don't normally see on the Weather Channel or your local news. Then this is what it looks like after it's been filtered. See the difference? So we're going to do this. I'm going to make this semi-transparent so we can see through it, okay? And then we're going to turn on the base reflectivity and look at the difference. With base reflectivity, that looks like chaff. Without it. So they obviously really, there's a big difference between what the public sees and what you're able to see when you get into the other, versions of the radar data. And all of this information flows through something called Raytheon's AWIPS-2. So all of this weather data flows through a Raytheon product and is filtered before it's delivered to even the National Weather Service. All right, so once again, public version, private version. Big difference. Very, very big difference. There's another long, that's birds, I'm sure. And they're not there on the public version. So there's your big difference in the NEXRAD radar data. You can check those out. When you click on Add Maps, it's under Alerts and Weather, Rain and Snow, and there's two right here, U.S. rainfall, NEXRAD radar base reflectivity, and NEXRAD radar Ridge 2. I have two different sources of that. Plus I have NASA's IMERG and a whole bunch others, European Meteostat, and a whole bunch of different sources. So that's the purpose of ClimateViewer 3D, so that you can not just see, what the government and the National Weather Service is going to let you see, but you get to see the whole picture. And that doesn't even count everything that's on the Earth monitor, where you can really get into all the other stuff like VentureSky, the Earth Null School wind map, NOAA Now Coast, the College of DuPage stuff, NEXRAD radar animations, even the one from, the National Weather Service, CONUS Loop. They all just pop up in a little window, and then you can close the window, go right back. And I've got flight tracking, ship tracking, and all that stuff. But anyway, let's get back to the story at hand. So this is NEXRAD, in America, and those are all the NEXRAD stations. But did you know that is not all of the Doppler radars in America? There are several more you probably have never heard of, and they also do not show up on the weather, though they track the weather. One is called the Joint Surveillance Systems, or Air Surveillance Radar, Air Route Surveillance Radar, ASR4. They are the red dots, and you can see these here. Joint Surveillance System. So a lot of times when I'm watching Mike Morales' Above Ground World News, what he's actually seeing is interference between the two radars. In this example, they're like side by side. And trust me, those were very hard to find. And then we also have what are called terminal Doppler weather radar. They are in yellow. And what they are just like NEXRAD, but they're Doppler weather radars that are near airports. They have a shorter range, but they have a much higher accuracy. So what they are usually used for is to find ground level wind conditions for planes that are going to be landing. So weather closer to the ground, much higher accuracy, and usually located near an airport. So now we have red, green, and yellow. Green is NEXRAD, red is Joint Surveillance System, and yellow is Terminal Doppler Weather Radar. And we'll just throw one last one in there because that's not all the Doppler radars. We also have something called the Integrated Ocean Observing System, IOOS Doppler radars, and they're all along the coast. And what they do is they shoot their radar beams at that ocean. And what they can do is tell things like what direction the water's flowing in, the temperature, the height, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure that they drive marine life batshit crazy. Question in chat, what does the Joint Surveillance do? They are FAA long-range radars for tracking aircraft. Interesting note, during 9/11, apparently those were all shut off, and that's why we couldn't find the flights of 9/11. With all of these air route service surveillance radars, ARS, shit, you're killing me. ARSR4s is the terminology for it, that we couldn't find them. So the Joint Surveillance System is also used by the military to track flights, but it also tracks weather. So there you go. All right, so let's move back to the story at hand. All right, so we've done these are Doppler radars, these are the NEXRAD radars, and that's where they're seeing these chaff dispersals. And they, of course, nobody has access to the weather information that's coming out of the ARSR4s or Joint Surveillance System. I've yet to be able to find a public source of that information. And I've got plenty of satellite images of this too. So regardless, I'm not going to answer that question. So a friend of mine, Dabu77, actually covered one of these. This is December 12th, 2018. Mystery radar blips appear over Illinois and Kentucky. Military denies releasing chaff. And you can see this here. Here's the link. And
we have an incident that you can see here off of radar showing this blip that some are saying it resembles the chaff dropped by military jets or by C-130s in terms of training and things like that. Problem is that none of the military branches are admitting that they did this. None of them. So this mystery blip was picked up here on the radar just northwest of Mount Carmel, between Mount Carmel and Mount Vernon. And you can see it comes on down and falls into a line. Now, normally when they drop the military shaft, it will already be in a line and it will drift. This kind of started as a big ball, and then maybe another ball was added to it south of Mount Carmel. But you can see it takes one big...
So that's a pretty interesting little clip there, because normally you don't get to see one evolve like that. But let's see what the meteorologists have to say about this.
Sometimes, occasionally, the military will put some substances into the atmosphere that are detected by our radar, our weather surveillance radar. It's a substance that's called chaff.
The chaffs do look similar to the oncoming storm system, but they're actually an indication of an aircraft. We replayed the radar images from 8:40 a.m. Turns out several of those chaffs or planes were near the San Diego and Baja areas. Depending on how low and how fast, the planes could have created that sonic boom.
Let's talk about military chaff. You may or may not have heard of this. Now, chaff is something that the aircraft are equipped with. It's a spray that they put out in the atmosphere to confuse ground radars. It's a protection against, say, the radar-guided missiles, okay? So when they're flying these test patterns, they'll chaff the sky, and it shows up on radars. Now, I was looking at my radar wondering, could it have been a flight pattern? Well, here's what happened. I called the National Weather Service, and something interesting here. They confirmed that this right here, this and this are not rain. That was not rain on our radar. So this is not rain. What is it? Could it have been chaff? Well, we may never know.
But we've been dealing a lot with some military activity in terms of chaff anyway, and that's something that I experienced for the first time yesterday. That was a whole lot of fun. And that's where the military just basically dumps some of the tiny particles of plastic or metal mylar into the atmosphere. And basically they do this when we do already have weather in the area, because it's been around since as long as radar has been around, because that's the shot from yesterday's 6 o'clock show. What they do is try to confuse ground-based Doppler radar systems, and as Mark put it so kindly, ground-based meteorologists. And yes, ladies and gentlemen of the armed forces, it worked well. That's a shot of the mylar. That's a shot of the chaff, again, moving through the atmosphere yesterday. As you can see.
Now, as you heard her, she said mylar. And that's another, another term that was not brought up in the article. These are plastic fibers, but continue.
A very distinctly different pattern from when a storm system would move through.
So onto this one. This is my favorite video of all time on the subject.
We've got a bit of an unusual situation. Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic, or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is. 50 in Medford right now, 48 in Wyoming.
So this guy, shortly after making this video, retired from the station. And of course, he said it had nothing to do with him being forced out. But I'll let you just let that sink in. And then I think this is another really good one because it shows an extreme amount of chaff.
Last weather segment. This is inevitably military or something going on. The government, the Air Force, they send out what's known as chaff, and it's a way to experiment with the radar systems. And when you see this kind of a pattern like this, you can rest assured there's something going on. They're actually little bitty magnetic and little bitty strips of, whether it's aluminum, they change it, but what happens is the radar deflects off of all these little pieces, and they use it actually as a jamming mechanism for radar in warfare, but it can also jam our radar and make rain appear that there really is no rain out there. Later on tomorrow, there could be a few shots.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And then I think I've got one more here. Okay, so now we're to the real nuts and butts of things. So, as the guy said, I was in the Marines, and I can tell you for certain, some of those videos are like 2012. I mean, these are old videos. I've just known about these videos, and I figured I'd, do a little refresher for those who weren't familiar with this topic at all. I've been chasing down the NEXRAD phenomena for many, many years. Me and Dutch since go way back to 2011, talking about harp rings and, all of that sort of thing. But I won't get into that. That's a story for another time. But regardless, this is a an issue that most people know very little about, and of course all they talk about is Delta Airlines or the Southwest Airlines and chemtrails without ever giving you any kind of real information. So this is the realest information you're about to get on the subject of chaff. And this comes, of course, directly from marines.mil. I'm going to drop this link in chat, and then I'm going to read away. This is from the Department of the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, but it's on marines.mil, and it's dated 6 December 1978. Performing electronic countermeasures in the United States and Canada. This regulation gives frequency band letter designations for the use of electronic warfare. It gives frequency band authorizations, geographical restrictions, altering requirements, and operational procedures governing active electronic countermeasures, ECM, in the United States and Canada. It sets up procedures for clearing frequencies for airborne, ground, and shipborne operations not specifically authorized for ECM. It applies as shown in paragraph 2. So you got policy on electronic countermeasures, who this regulation applies to, explanation of terminology. I'm going to focus on that section. Geographical restrictions, restrictions on rope chaff, if you've never heard of that, and procedures for in-flight ECM, for processing ECM clearances, for suspending in-flight ECM, local frequency clearances, and it's got some attachments at the bottom. So, policy on ECM, the Joint Chiefs of Staff Electronic Warfare Policy provides guidance for using ECM by the military services of the United States. This regulation implements that joint policy. ECM are vital to the missions of the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD. My father worked at NORAD. And the military services of the United States and Canada. ECM must not be suspended or curtailed unless absolutely necessary. Let me say that again. ECM must not be suspended or curtailed unless absolutely necessary. So, how regular is this? I mean, is this like a every damn day thing and they just occasionally catch it on radar? Or what would be the purpose of jamming radar over America on a regular basis? I think I know the answers, but we'll just leave that for another video. So, ECM may be stopped in the case of an emergency, safety or flight situation or interference with operations of a facility. Agencies requesting ECM be stopped must ensure that ECM operator knows the identity of the requesting agency and the expected length of stoppage. And then it talks about a whole bunch of superseding laws and all this stuff. Who this regulation applies to: all military organizations engaged in surface or in-flight ECM in the United States or Canada. For those who don't know, ECM, electronic countermeasures, means you chaff. All military organizations operating electromagnetic, radiating, or receiving equipment which may be subject to intentional or unintentional interference from ECM. Civilian contractors performing ECM in the United States but not Canada, provided that the contractor meets the following criteria. The contractor is currently under a military contract requiring ECM. The ECM equipment is used by the contractor, has been contracted for, or is owned by the government. A military resident representative is available to supervise the contractor on the use of this regulation. So, not just the military, contractors. And when you say contractors, that means private companies, DOD, Department of Defense contractors, other companies, not just the U.S. Air Force, Navy, Marines, all of which have planes, by the way. Everybody's probably familiar, that the Marines have the Harrier jet and the Navy has, the F-14 Tomcats and the F-18 Hornets and all of that stuff. So all three branches have, planes, and all of which have chaff on them. So this is not just a one-off. But regardless, back to the story, because this is where it gets great. Terminology, so that we all know terms, because terminology is so important these days. Let's do some of that. Surface ECM equals all types of electronic jamming, deception, or chaff dispensing done by ground-based or shipboard equipment. In-flight ECM, all types of electronic jamming, deception, or chaff dispensing done by aircraft other than vehicles or other vehicles in flight. Small-scale ECM mission, in-flight ECM done by a single aircraft or by 2 to 6 aircraft working as a unit. Large-scale ECM mission, in-flight ECM done by 7 or more aircraft working as a unit. Chaff, strips of frequency-cut metal foil, wire, or metallized glass fiber used to reflect echoes for confusion purposes. It's usually dropped from the aircraft or expelled from shells or rockets as radar countermeasures. And once again, that's what we're talking about here. Expelled from shells or rockets as radar countermeasure. And that's the fire you see there. What's up, everybody in chat? Love you, mean it. I'm trying to get through as much material as possible. So let me press on. Rope. And this is something that I know nobody's heard of. Rope, an element of chaff consisting of a long roll of metallic foil or wire designed for broad, low-frequency response. Rope chaff. Chaff that contains one or more rope elements. Think about that for a second. Big photo. An unclassified general call sign for an aircraft performing in-flight ECM. Big photo is used by civilian contractors during in-flight ECM when operating under provisions of paragraph 2C, like I talked about earlier. So they call that, doesn't that look like a big photo to you? Big photo. That's the military jargon for what you're seeing on the screen there. Ground photo, an unclassified general call sign for ground radar stations intentionally engaged in in-flight ECM. Buzzer, an unclassified brevity code word. It stands for electronic jamming or deception by ECM. Stream, an unclassified brevity code word. It stands for chaff drops at short intervals. These appear on radar scope as a continuous line of interference. Stream chaff. So that's what we're seeing on all these Doppler radars. Streams. Burst. An unclassified brevity code word. It stands for chaff drops at sufficiently long enough intervals so they appear on a radar scope as individual target returns. For purposes of this regulation, burst is further explained as a single chaff drop of not more than 3 seconds, spaced not less than 90 seconds apart, with no more than 4 bursts in a 40 nautical mile radius of other chaff drops. That could be what we saw in Dabu's video. So, but either burst or stream chaff where they dumped it and then some other flight came along and added to that by doing a burst stream, like they said, not more than 3 seconds, spaced not less than 90 seconds apart, with no more than 4 bursts in a 40 nautical mile radius of other chaff drops. So there you go. Local frequency clearance, a clearance for ECM in a specified area. The clearance must be coordinated with local agencies concerned. United States includes, as referred to in this regulation, includes Continental United States, ECM area, the state of Alaska, ECM area, the state of Hawaii, ECM area, the island of Guam, ECM area, and the island of Puerto Rico, ECM areas as explained. And then they go through what each of these are. CONUS is the 48 states, Alaska, the landmass of Alaska, including the Aleutian chain. So they go through all of that. Where are we at? Right here. O, Canada. P, coherent repeaters. Non-communication coherent repeater jamming, angled deceivers, break lock techniques may not have been significant effect on non-victim receivers and does not require any ECM frequency clearances. Frequency band designations. We won't get into that. But then it gets into some pretty interesting stuff down here. Restrictions on rope chaff. There's a possibility that the rope unit of chaff could short circuit high voltage transmission lines and can create hazards to life and property. To prevent this, aircraft must not dispense rope chaff in peacetime unless special authorization is given by the major command headquarters having command jurisdiction over them. Special permission is required from the Canadian Forces Air Command before dispensing rope chaff over Canada. The Major Command may grant authority to dispense rope chaff for test tactics or research and develop requirements. Rope chaff dispensing on routine training sorties or operational readiness inspections must be approved by the cognizant military department. When special authority is granted to dispense rope chaff, the organizations concerned must take every precaution to make sure that rope chaff falls on water or on land devoid of any high voltage electric power transmission lines. A safe area must be computed for each sortie. In doing so, organizations must consider the following, blah, blah, blah. So what they're saying there is that basically, because it's a long rope coming out of the back of the plane, that literally, if it fell on, let's say, two high-powered power lines, it could, short circuit them or cause, electricity to jump from one high-power line to the other, and that would be really bad. Yeah, power outages, big sparks, blown up transformers, all that kind of stuff. So rope chaff, bad. Bad for power lines. Anyways, I could go through this whole damn document. It's very long. But they even go into, like how you notify NORAD, who not to notify. Things like, somewhere in here it says something about, in-flight clearance, ECM clearance. And it literally says in there, look, you can tell NORAD, but you don't have to tell the FAA. Notifies the concerned FAA Transport Canada Center if burst chaff drops are within 40 nautical miles of FAA or 50 nautical miles of Transportation Canada terminal facilities. I can't remember where I read it, but literally in here, it goes through all of this. So if you want to know about chaff and the actual regulations behind it, I'm gonna drop that link one more time in chat for you. Send that to your local weather dude. I'm sure he'll get a kick out of it. So why is all this important? Because electronic warfare is a thing, and it is always being practiced. Right now, in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, they are doing electromagnetic warfare testing, and they recently had something called the Twisted Tree Mystery, and they couldn't understand what happened up there. But basically, they're playing with baby ionospheric heaters on the backs of Jeeps and trucks, and electronic jammers that are on planes, the Growler jets, and all of that sort of stuff. And suddenly, out of nowhere, trees And you can see how large that tree is. I mean, that's not a small dude. And you know, he's got a tree that's thicker than he is tall, and at the base of it, it's literally twisted off its roots. Interestingly enough, during this event, local wind radar did not detect any wind at all. So if you want to read a really good one, watch this video, Twisted Tree Mystery and the Electromagnetic Warfare in the Olympic Peninsula. The people up there are really outraged about this this incident and what the U.S. Navy is doing up there. But just real quick, let me see. I believe this is the Lake Quinault area, and I went and actually found their pictures on this, and this is their, you know, portable transmitter. And what they're doing is basically flying over the area. This is where they're actually doing the electronic warfare training. So they're constantly doing electromagnetic warfare training all over America. But this is from Rosalind Peterson, the late Rosalind Peterson, and she had put this image together, and then her U.S. Navy page disappeared. But as you can see, Northwest Training Range Complex expansion. This is the Northwest Training Range. It's off the coast of the entire coast of Washington and the Lake Quinault area and Olympic Peninsula. This is the Northern California Range Complex, Point Mugu Range Complex, and the Southern California Range Complex. Then China Lake Range Complex and Fallon Range Complex. That's up there in Dane Wigington's area. Now, of course, I've sent this picture and all of this information to Dane Wigington, but this is something that people don't want to talk about, that they are doing. The U.S. Navy toxic chemical menu increases yearly with ocean dumping and disposal, electromagnetic weapons testing, submarine warfare exercises, experimental weapons testing, missile exercises, sinking exercises, gunnery exercises, bombing exercises, shock and awe, lasers, and sonar. And basically, oh yeah, they're doing it on the East Coast too. So this is the East Coast side, and you could see all of the Navy testing ranges. And then right down here at the very bottom, you can see the Florida and the Gulf of Mexico Navy warfare range. So the U.S. Navy, I mean, I understand they have to train. But damn it, can't they go out, to the middle of the Atlantic where it's all going to blow away from land, instead of letting all of their aluminum and mylar and, rope chaff and all this crazy shit drift over land? You have to ask yourself, why are they doing this? Why wouldn't they, go somewhere far away to, do practices of dropping chemicals over America? And I think the answer is pretty simple. Because it has happened before, and it will continue to happen, and it always will happen. So this is why I follow chemtrails, because it was a conspiracy, military experiments on unsuspecting public. And I go through the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Okay? First of all, I do a little background, weather warfare and defoliation. This is Operation Popeye, and how they did weather warfare over Vietnam. But then there was Operation Ranch Hand, Operation Trail Dust, and that's where they were dropping the rainbow agents like Agent Orange, Agent Blue, Agent Green. Most people don't know about the other agents, but regardless, the herbicides were sprayed by the U.S. Air Force flying C-123s using the call sign Hades. Hades is the underworld, or hell, for those who don't know. The planes were fitted with specially developed spray tanks with the capacity of 1,000 U.S. gallons of herbicides. A plane sprayed a swath of land that was 80 meters wide and 16 kilometers, 10 miles long. in about 4.5 minutes, at a rate of about 3 gallons per acre. Sorties usually consisted of 3 to 5 airplanes flying side by side. 95% of the herbicides and defoliants used in the war were sprayed by U.S. Air Force as a part of Operation Ranch Hand. The remaining 5% were sprayed by the U.S. Chemical Corps, other military branches, and the Republic of Vietnam using hand sprayers, hand spray trucks, helicopters, and boats. Between 1961 and 1971, 19.3 million gallons of herbicides were used in Vietnam, which amounts to 5,193 gallons daily. And as we all know, what happened to the Vietnamese, our soldiers who are suffering greatly from Agent Orange to this day. But that's not even where it stops. Bug warfare, Operation Big Itch, Big Buzz, Mayday, Dropkick, Dugway proving grounds used to determine coverage patterns and survivability of tropical rat flea for use in biological warfare as a disease vector, dropping fleas from bombs. In the United States, Operation Big Buzz, 1955, U.S. state of Georgia, 330 million uninfected mosquitoes were dropped by aircraft by E-14 bombs and dispensed from the ground. Operation Mayday, November 1956, in Savannah, Georgia, designed to reveal information about the dispersal of yellow fever mosquitoes in an urban area. The mosquitoes were released from ground level. Operation Dropkick, Savannah, Georgia, where uninfected mosquitoes were released in residential neighborhoods, and another 1956 test in Avon Park Bombing Range, Florida, where 600,000 mosquitoes were released by plane. So, does the military experiment on us? Yes, they have. They'll do it again. So this is where it gets ugly. Operation Large Area Coverage. U.S. Army Chemical Corps operated, which dispersed microscopic zinc cadmium sulfide particles over much of the United States from a C-119 flying boxcar. The purpose was to determine the dispersion and geographic range of biological or chemical agents. That is some scary shit. Operation Dew 1 and 2, 1951-1952, consisted of 5 separate trials from March 52 to April 52 that were designed to test the feasibility of maintaining a large aerosol cloud release offshore until it drifted over land, achieving a large area coverage. St. Louis, 1953. The Manhattan-Rochester Coalition research on health effects of radioactive materials and tests on vulnerable populations without consent in St. Louis. This is where it gets bad. So this is the most popular, part of this story that most people know, that the Manhattan Project was, the U.S. military compartmentalizing people to create a nuclear bomb. In one room, they were creating a pipe. In the next room, they were creating, a detonation device. And nobody in the building knew they were creating a nuclear bomb. So what this shows is pretty scary, and I'm going to bring it up real quick. This piece analyzes a covert Manhattan Project spin-off organization referred to here as the Manhattan-Rochester Coalition. An obscure aerosol study in St. Louis, Missouri, conducted under the contract of the U.S. military from 1953 through 54 and 1963 through 65. The military-sponsored studies targeted a segregated, high-density urban area where low-income persons of color predominantly resided. Examination of the Manhattan-Rochester Coalition and the St. Louis aerosol studies reveal their connections to each other and to a much larger military project that was secretly tested on humans, both alive and deceased, in an effort to understand the effects of weaponized radiation. Through this case study, the author explores how a large number of participants inside an organization will willingly participate in organizational acts that are harmful to others, and how large numbers of outsiders who may or may not be victims of organizational activities are unable to determine illegal or harmful activity by an organization. The author explains how ethical and observational lapses are engineered by the organization through several specific mechanisms in an effort to disable critical analysis and prevent both internal and external dissent of harmful organizational actions. Through studying the process of complex organizational deviance, we can develop public policies that protect the public's right to know and construct checks and methods to minimize the chance of covert projects that are contrary to societal norms. Now, this was written by Lisa Martino Taylor, and this is I had to do some serious digging to find this. The St. Louis in the Operation Large Area Coverage was not the only ones. There were many of these. So I got the entire list. And once again, there's the link in chat. And this is why I'm ever vigilant against chemtrails today. Because those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. So here's the picture. And it shows number of releases, start date, end date, where it happened, quantity of zinc cadmium sulfide in kilograms, approximate area affected in square miles, and cadmium inhalation intake. So it shows how much chemicals they dropped on people and how much they breathed in, where it happened, and how large of an area. And you can see things like there's St. Louis, 1963, just like she said, through 65, 984 kilograms of zinc cadmium sulfide, a mildly radioactive material, over 7,400 square miles. And the list goes on and on. Camp Cook, California, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Corpus Christi, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas, Washington, Nevada, Chippewa National Forest, Minnesota, San Francisco, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Oceanside, California, Pack Forest, Washington, Maryland, Camp Briar and Camp Dietrich, Maryland, Biltmore Beach, and then they give the names right here. This is Operation Mate, Operation Seltzer, Operation White Horse, I believe. Yeah, that's Operation Dew 1 and 2 was the other one. Windsock. Gotta love this stuff. There's the offshore releases, onshore releases. These were ones that drifted over California from those naval warfare testing grounds I was showing you. So... and then Dugway Proving Grounds down here. And this is right here, summary of major events and problems at the Army. I wonder if this link is still even live. I wrote this article in November of 2013. Yes, there it is. It's still there. Summary of major events and problems, United States Army Chemical Corps. Drop the link in chat for you. So, riddle me this. Is what we're seeing really chaff? Or are they at it again? And that's really the question we have to ask ourselves, because we have no way of knowing. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And that's why I follow chemtrails so carefully, because it was a conspiracy. The military experiments on the public, and the military drops chaff. They don't tell anybody. Nobody knows how safe this stuff is. It's still going on today. And could it be something as bad as what happened in the 50s, where they were literally dumping radioactive material all over America? Oh, by the way, they then, and I made this infographic right here. This is the Clinton School in downtown St. Louis. This is a black neighborhood. And this is Stanford University, and the paper is called Behavior of Aerosol Clouds Within Cities, Chemical Corps, U.S. Army. Joint Quarterly Report number 3, January through March 1953. And what they were doing was trying to simulate a nuclear attack on downtown St. Louis and see where the radioactive dust would go. So they checked the bottom floor, they checked the top floor of people's residences, they checked all in the school. And of course, they chose a black neighborhood to do this release in. And you can see right here, this is where the release is. And I added this green color just to highlight the area. But this is actually from the military's literature. They'll, to this day, they'll say that nobody was hurt. Well, that's not exactly the case. So let's see if we can find this clip real quick.
And she wonders if there is a connection to the secret testing.
They isolated me, and I stayed there about a month to recuperate. I lost my fingernails, toenails, the lesions on my body. Eventually, they fed me intravenously. I couldn't see well. They had to keep me in the dark.
It doesn't sound possible.
We were playing, and we ran in the house because we saw these guys in the alley in spacesuits. And that's what we called them. Now I know they were hazard suits.
These women who never met share similar stories and illnesses.
I remember the trucks coming by. I remember the men on the roof.
In the 90s, the Army admitted to Cold War spraying and even confessed to planting a cover-up that they were testing a smokescreen to protect cities in case of an aerial attack from the Soviet Union. The Army insisted the spray was harmless.
This was linked to the development and testing of weaponized radiation.
That right there is Lisa Martino Taylor. She's the one who wrote the paper that blew this wide open.
Sociologist Lisa Martino Taylor has spent years researching the St. Louis testing and has gathered thousands of now declassified documents. She says cadmium would have been toxic enough, but government documents show a link between the St. Louis testing and military-funded human radiation experiments. The military now admits to some horrific Cold War human experiments around the country. A handful of hospital patients were secretly injected with plutonium. Babies and pregnant women unknowingly received radioactive iodine. And from 1946 to 1953, 73 mentally disabled children in Massachusetts were fed oatmeal containing radioactive calcium. Yet much of what happened in St. Louis remains shrouded in secrecy.
Not only was data missing, data had been deleted.
In 1972, the government destroyed Pruitt-Igoe.
What is it that made this study so classified that they're still not talking today about it?
Decades later, questions haunt these survivors. Could the chemical spray have caused their degenerative bone disease or the cancer that plagues them and their families?
That one of the types of cancer I had was papillary carcinoma, which the surgeon said to me when at first I was diagnosed. He said, "Did you have any radiation exposure?" And I said, "Not that I know of."
These women haven't forgotten, and they vow to keep talking about what happened now that someone's listening. Do you trust the government?
It's betrayal. I feel absolutely betrayed.
I know this has gone on in other countries, but I thought that our country was a little bit better than that.
Whether radioactive material was used remains an open question. What is not in dispute is the Army selected the poor and the powerless and exposed them to potentially harmful chemicals without their knowledge or consent. After our initial report aired last month, Missouri's U.S. Senators Claire McCaskill and Roy Blunt wrote to the Secretary of the Army demanding more information. The Army has yet to respond. An Army official told me they'd first respond to the senators before making any statement to the media.
So, Lisa, do we know how much zinc cadmium sulfide was sprayed in the St. Louis area?
Well, a lot of data is missing, but according to the National Research Council, between 1963 and 1965, more than a ton of this chemical was sprayed here. And the truly horrific part of these programs is that people had no idea that they were being used like human lab animals.
So what happens next?
Well, we wait to hear if there's going to be public hearings from the U.S. government, and we wait to hear from the Army.
I'm sure there'll be more reporting. Lisa, thank you very much.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And like I said right there, there's the total 984 kilograms. St. Louis. It all happened, and it will happen again. Because there still are no way, there still is no accountability. There's still no way to catch people in the act. So we really have no way to tell whether or not these were chaff drops or whether they were something similar to what you just saw on the screen. But regardless, that's why I'm ever vigilant. That's why I research chemtrails. And I try to differentiate these things for people so that they can understand the history so that we don't repeat it. But that's my story for tonight. You guys now know a little bit more about chaff, and you certainly know a little bit more about the chemtrails that were dropped during the 50s and 60s and why I'm so vigilant about this sort of thing, because I don't believe that anybody military, I don't think there's any excuse you could possibly give to experiment on humans without their consent, to spray chemicals in the sky and get away with this shit. So that's why I have proposed the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. When we did weather warfare over Vietnam and sprayed all of those chemicals that hurt all those soldiers and all of that stuff, there was a weather warfare ban passed in 1978. The problem is, to this day, there is no way to catch somebody in the act. And what I'm proposing is a add-on to that law, which is called NMOD, the Environmental Modification Convention. So my Accountability Act calls for transparency and verification. I hope that you guys will check that out at climateviewer.com/nmod, and maybe we can bring some real transparency and prevent something like what happened in the 50s and 60s from happening again, if it isn't already. So what we're seeing on radar, nobody knows. Hasn't been confirmed. Oh, they said it was chaff one time. The next time, nobody knows. So just remember, they're always spraying something up there, and without some kind of accountability and transparency, we will never know. So please help me make that a solution. I hope that you guys will continue to support my work on patreon.com/climateviewer or a one-time donation on PayPal or GoFundMe. Please spread this video. Please like it if you did. Please like it if you didn't. If you didn't catch the live stream, leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Sharing is caring, so please share this video so that others will understand the big picture of chemical spraying, the history of it, and the current radar anomalies that we're seeing. Check out Mike Morales on YouTube, Above Ground World News. He does an excellent job of going through and catching a lot of these radar anomalies on a regular basis. And keep your eyes to the sky, people, because there's something funky going on up there, and these planes aren't just farting. So now that you guys know, knowing is half the battle, and with information comes power, and with power comes great responsibility. So I ask that you use this information to attack ideas, not people.